One question changed everything. Have you ever loved someone before you knew the truth about them? I don't mean small things, like their favorite food or the music they play in the car. I mean the kind of truth that quietly changes how you see your marriage, your family, and even yourself. That single question stayed with me all week here in the United States, following me from the kitchen in the morning to the quiet moments before sleep. And if you're watching this video, maybe it's following you too. This is not a perfect love story. It's a real one. And it happened to me just 1 week ago. You see, many people come to this channel because they feel tired. Tired of learning English. Tired of starting and stopping. Tired of feeling like they are failing at something that should be simple by now. I understand that feeling deeply. Because this week, I felt tired in a different way. Emotionally tired. The kind of tiredness that makes your body move, but your heart slow down. 1 week ago, I arrived in the US thinking this trip would be simple. Family time. Normal days. Familiar routines. But life doesn't care about our plans. Life waits for quiet moments, then asks hard questions. And the hardest question I faced was this: can love stay real if it was built before the truth? At first, nothing dramatic happened. No big argument. No shocking scene. Just small moments. A pause in conversation. A look that stayed too long. Silence where there used to be comfort. If you've ever been married or loved deeply, you know these moments. They don't scream. They whisper. And whispers are harder to ignore. I remember standing in the kitchen one morning, holding a cup of coffee, listening to the house wake up. The kids were talking softly in the other room. The sound felt warm. Safe. But inside me, something felt off. My brain kept repeating simple words, almost like English practice. Something is wrong. Something is missing. Slow. Clear. Honest. This channel is about learning English slowly. But real life also teaches slowly. One feeling at a time. One realization at a time. Many people think love breaks because of big lies. But often, love feels fragile because of unspoken truths. Things we sense but don't name. Things we feel but don't ask about. This week taught me that truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it shows up quietly, sits next to you, and waits to be noticed. If you're struggling with English, your brain does something similar. It knows more than you think. But fear keeps it quiet. Fear of sounding wrong. Fear of being judged. Fear of failing again. In love, fear does the same thing. It tells you to stay silent, to keep peace, to avoid pain. But silence has a cost. During this week, I realized I had fallen in love long before I understood the full story. And that realization didn't destroy me. It woke me up. Slowly. Gently. Like learning a new word and finally understanding how to use it in a real sentence. This video is not here to give you perfect answers. It's here to walk with you. Slowly. Clearly. One story at a time. We will talk about love, marriage, family, children, and yes, learning English through real emotions. Because language sticks better when it carries meaning. So before we go deeper, let me ask you something. Not as a teacher. Not as a storyteller. But as someone who is still learning, just like you. If love began before the truth, does that make it weaker? Or does it give it a chance to become stronger? 7 days in the same house. 7 days doesn't sound like much. 1 week. A short line on a calendar. But when you spend 7 days in the same house with the same people, especially in a place far from what you call home, time stretches. It slows down. It starts showing you things you were too busy to notice before. This past week in the US, we didn't travel much. No big plans. No exciting schedule. Just daily life. Morning routines. Shared meals. Quiet afternoons. The kind of days that look boring from the outside but feel heavy on the inside. And sometimes, boring days are the most dangerous ones for a marriage, because there's nowhere to hide. Have you ever noticed how silence feels different when it lasts too long? At first, it's peaceful. Then it becomes awkward. Then it starts asking questions. Each morning, we woke up under the same roof, but not always in the same emotional place. The kids moved freely through the house, laughing, asking questions, living fully in the moment. Adults don't do that. Adults carry yesterday with them. Adults bring unfinished conversations into breakfast. I caught myself listening more than speaking. Listening to footsteps. To doors opening and closing. To the tone of voices. When you love someone, your brain becomes sensitive in a strange way. It notices small changes. A pause. A shorter answer. A smile that arrives late. My mind kept translating these moments into simple English sentences, almost automatically. Something feels different. Something is unsaid. This channel exists because many of you feel stuck learning English. You repeat lessons. You watch videos. But progress feels slow. What people don't tell you is that the brain learns best when it feels safe, and when it feels curious. This week, my brain was curious in a painful way. It wanted to understand what was happening, but it didn't want to face the answer yet. Being in the same house for 7 days removed distractions. No work excuses. No later. No emotion en el escape. Just presence. And presence is uncomfortable when something inside a relationship is unbalanced. There's a psychological reason for this. When routines slow down, the nervous system relaxes. And when it relaxes, hidden emotions rise to the surface. That's why vacations sometimes lead to arguments. That's why quiet weekends feel heavier than busy weekdays. Your body finally has space to feel. I noticed myself doing what many language learners do. Avoiding the hard parts. Choosing easy topics. Keeping conversations shallow. In English learning, this looks like watching videos but never speaking. In relationships, it looks like talking about weather instead of feelings. One afternoon, while the kids were busy, the house fell into a rare stillness. No phones. No background noise. Just the sound of breathing and distance. That moment felt louder than any argument. My heart asked a question my mouth wasn't ready to say yet. Did I fall in love with who I thought he was, or who he really is? That question didn't bring panic. It brought awareness. And awareness is the first step in any real learning, language or love. If you're listening to this for English practice, notice how simple the language is. Short sentences. Clear ideas. That's intentional. Because clarity calms the brain. And when the brain is calm, it can process truth, slowly, safely, honestly. By the end of the 7th day, nothing had exploded. But something had shifted. I could feel it. Like standing on a bridge, knowing you can't stay where you are, but not yet ready to cross. And that's where this story really begins. Loving before knowing. Have you ever realized you were already deep inside a story before you understood how it began? That's what this week felt like. Not a sudden fall, but a quiet awareness that I had been falling for a long time, without noticing how far down I had gone. I didn't fall in love in one dramatic moment. There was no movie scene. No perfect confession. Love grew slowly, through ordinary days, shared responsibilities, small kindnesses. And because it grew so naturally, I never stopped to ask certain questions. Not because I didn't care, but because I trusted. Trust is a strange thing. When it's strong, it makes life easier. When it's misplaced, it makes the truth harder to accept. This week, living together every day, I began to see patterns I had once ignored. Not bad things. Just gaps. Little spaces where explanations should have been. My brain tried to fill them in automatically, the way it does when you're listening to English and don't know every word. You guess from context. You move on. You tell yourself understanding will come later. In language learning, this works sometimes. In love, it eventually catches up with you. I remember sitting at the table one evening, helping the kids with something simple. Laughter filled the room. From the outside, everything looked whole. But inside, I felt a quiet tension. My heart was asking questions my past self never needed answers to. Who am I loving? Who am I trusting? What don't I know yet? Psychologically, we tend to idealize people when emotional attachment forms early. Our brains release chemicals that soften edges and blur uncertainty. This is not weakness, it's biology. Love literally changes how clearly we see. And that's beautiful. Until clarity becomes necessary. This is why many people struggle with English even after years of study. Not because they are incapable, but because they learned passively. They fell in love with the idea of fluency without fully understanding the work behind it. When reality appears, motivation shakes. That doesn't mean the love was fake. It means it was incomplete. During this week, I had to accept something uncomfortable. I loved deeply before I knew fully. And instead of breaking me, that realization humbled me. It reminded me that love is not a contract signed after reading every page. It's a relationship that grows, and sometimes pauses, while you're still reading. One night, after the house had gone quiet, I lay awake thinking about a simple English word, before. Before knowing. Before understanding. Before truth. Before doesn't mean wrong. It just means early. And early love is not a mistake. It's a starting point. The question is not whether I loved too soon. The question is whether I'm willing to learn now. Just like language. If you're listening to this and thinking about your own journey, your marriage, your relationship, or even your English practice, ask yourself this gently: am I avoiding clarity or preparing for it? Because love that begins before knowing doesn't have to end. But it does need courage to continue. Small moments, big cracks. People think relationships break in big moments. A fight. A betrayal. A dramatic discovery. But this week taught me something quieter and more dangerous. Love often cracks in small moments. Moments so ordinary that you almost miss them. It started with timing. One person speaking while the other was already thinking about something else. A question answered too quickly. A laugh that didn't invite another one. These things sound small. They are small. But small things repeat. And repetition builds patterns. If you're learning English, you know this feeling. You understand most of what you hear. Just not everything. So you nod. You smile. You move on. One missed word doesn't matter. But when missed words pile up, meaning changes. Communication feels thinner. Confidence drops. Relationships work the same way. This week, I noticed how easily we filled the house with activity to avoid stillness. The kids had energy, questions, needs. We handled them well, like a team that knew its roles. But teamwork is not the same as connection. You can function together without truly touching each other emotionally. One afternoon, something very simple happened. A comment. Not unkind. Not wrong. Just distant. And in that moment, I felt a shift inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Awareness. My body noticed before my mind did. That's important. Psychologists call this emotional intuition. Your nervous system detects changes before logic catches up. It's the same reason you sometimes feel confused in English before you know why. Your brain senses a gap. I realized I had been explaining away these moments for a long time, telling myself I was tired, or busy, or sensitive. And maybe all of that was true. But explanation is not the same as understanding. Explanation avoids discomfort. Understanding invites it in. Marriage, especially when children are involved, teaches you how to survive together. But love asks a different question. Are we still choosing each other, even in silence? That question stayed with me all week. In the evenings, after the kids slept, the house felt bigger. Too quiet. I wanted to fill the space, with noise, with screens, with anything. But instead, I sat with it. Just like I ask you to sit with English sometimes. Slow listening. No rushing. No escaping. And that's when I saw the cracks clearly. Not because they were huge, but because they were honest. Cracks don't mean something is broken beyond repair. They mean pressure has been applied for too long in one place. Here's the hopeful part. Small cracks are also easier to fix, if you notice them early. In learning English, one small habit can change everything. 5 minutes of speaking out loud. One sentence repeated slowly. Consistency beats intensity. Love works the same way. Small honest moments matter more than big promises. This week didn't destroy my belief in love. It refined it. It showed me that love isn't tested by disasters, but by ordinary days that ask quietly, "Are you still paying attention?" And once you notice the cracks, you have a choice. Ignore them, or listen. Children see the truth first. Children notice what adults slowly train themselves not to see. They don't analyze. They don't explain things away. They feel first, and they feel accurately. This past week, I understood that more clearly than ever. My children didn't hear the quiet conversations. They didn't know the thoughts running through my head. But they sensed the shift in the house almost immediately. Not as fear. Not as panic. Just awareness. And that awareness changed how they moved, spoke, and even played. One morning, I watched them from the kitchen while pretending to be busy. They were calmer than usual. Less noisy. More careful with their words. No one told them to act that way. They adjusted on their own. That's when it hit me. Children don't need explanations to understand emotional weather. They read it the way sailors read the sea. Psychologists call this emotional attunement. It's the ability to sense emotional changes in others without being taught. Children are born with it. Adults lose it when life teaches them to ignore discomfort instead of listening to it. If you're learning English, you may recognize this pattern. When you first start, you hear tone before grammar. You feel meaning before structure. Over time, fear of mistakes pushes you to overthink. You stop trusting your instincts. Love works the same way. We stop trusting what we feel and start negotiating with silence. This week, I realized I had been doing exactly that. I was managing emotions instead of naming them. Smiling instead of asking. Staying calm instead of being honest. From the outside, everything looked stable. From the inside, something was bending quietly. Children notice bending before breaking. One afternoon, something very small happened. A question from a child. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just curious. The kind of question that feels innocent, but lands heavy. I won't repeat the words, because the words aren't the point. The point is how my body reacted. My chest tightened. My thoughts slowed. And I knew in that moment that pretending wasn't protecting anyone. In family psychology, there's a simple truth. Children don't need perfect parents. They need predictable ones. Predictable doesn't mean flawless. It means emotionally honest. When adults hide tension, children internalize it. They assume responsibility for something that isn't theirs. That realization hurt. But it also clarified something important. This story is not just about romantic love. It's about the kind of love that teaches others how to face uncertainty. Learning English in front of children teaches the same lesson. When you try to speak and make mistakes, children don't judge you. They learn bravery. When you avoid speaking because you're afraid, they learn avoidance. Love behaves the same way. When you face truth gently, children learn resilience. When you avoid it, they learn fear dressed as peace. This week changed how I see silence. Silence is not always calm. Sometimes it's just unspoken tension waiting for direction. And children feel that tension long before adults admit it exists. The hopeful part is this: children are incredibly forgiving. They don't need everything fixed instantly. They need to see effort, movement, willingness. When honesty enters the room, even quietly, the emotional atmosphere changes. That's when I stopped asking myself, how do I keep everything comfortable? And started asking, how do I model courage without creating fear? The answer wasn't dramatic. It was slow, gentle, real. It looked like listening more closely, choosing clearer words, being present instead of perfect. Just like learning English. Slow practice. Simple sentences. Honest mistakes. Consistent effort. This week taught me that love doesn't collapse when children see truth. It collapses when they see adults run from it. And once I understood that, the direction of the week changed. Because love that includes children is not just about staying together. It's about showing them how to stay honest when things feel uncertain. When silence gets loud. Silence is often mistaken for peace. But silence can be loud, if you listen closely enough. This week in the US, silence followed me everywhere. It sat at the breakfast table. It lingered in the hallway after the kids went to bed. It waited patiently between simple questions and careful answers. Nothing was said out loud, yet everything was being communicated. If you've ever struggled with English listening, you know this feeling. You understand the words, but something feels off. The tone doesn't match. The pause lasts too long. Your brain whispers, I missed something. In relationships, silence works the same way. You hear the words, but you feel the distance. At first, I told myself it was normal. Everyone has quiet days. Everyone gets tired. Life is busy. These explanations sounded reasonable, and that's exactly why they were dangerous. Reasonable explanations can become hiding places. There's a psychological reason silence becomes louder under pressure. When emotional safety drops, the nervous system goes into alert mode. You start scanning, reading signs, interpreting pauses. Your body reacts before your mind forms words. That's why silence can feel heavier than arguments. At least arguments give your emotions a shape. This week, I noticed my body responding before I consciously understood why. Tight shoulders. Shorter breaths. A habit of checking my phone to escape the stillness. These weren't dramatic reactions. They were quiet signals. And quiet signals are easy to ignore, until they pile up. Marriage doesn't usually break in loud moments. It weakens in quiet ones that go unexamined. One evening, after the kids were asleep, we sat in the same room, doing different things. No conflict. No tension you could point to. Just distance. That kind of distance feels polite, controlled, almost respectful. But inside, it creates loneliness. And loneliness inside a relationship is one of the hardest emotions to admit. This is where many people give up on learning English too. Not because it's impossible, but because progress becomes invisible. You're listening, but not connecting. Speaking, but not expressing. You keep going through the motions while motivation quietly fades. Silence hides exhaustion. I realized I had been avoiding one simple thing, naming what I felt. Not blaming. Not accusing. Just naming. In language learning, naming matters. When you say, "I don't understand this word yet," the brain relaxes. When you pretend you understand, stress builds. Love responds the same way. There's a concept in communication psychology called emotional labeling. When you name an emotion accurately, your nervous system calms down. You don't fix the problem instantly, but you create space to work with it. Silence does the opposite. It traps emotion without release. That week, I understood something important. Silence wasn't protecting our relationship. It was postponing a necessary moment. And postponement has a cost. But here's the hopeful part. Silence doesn't mean absence of love. Often, it means love is afraid of doing damage. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of opening something that might not close easily. That fear comes from caring, not indifference. Once I saw that, my perspective shifted. The silence wasn't an enemy. It was a signal. A request for clarity. A pause before honesty. In English practice, pauses are not failures. They're thinking time. They're space for meaning to form. The problem isn't pausing. It's never continuing. This week taught me that love needs words the way language needs sound. Carefully chosen. Slowly spoken. Honestly meant. Not perfect. Just real. And when silence finally becomes too loud to ignore, it's not asking for noise. It's asking for truth, spoken gently. That realization didn't solve everything, but it changed how I listened. Fear of losing love. Fear doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't knock. It slips in quietly and pretends to be logic. This week, fear sat with me in ordinary moments. While washing dishes. While folding clothes. While listening to the kids laugh in the other room. On the surface, everything looked normal. Inside, a single question kept circling. If the truth is fully known, will love still choose me? That question is heavy because it doesn't attack. It waits. Many people think fear of losing love comes from jealousy or insecurity. But often, it comes from attachment. From caring deeply. From having something worth protecting. Fear shows up when love matters. If you're learning English, you know this fear well. The fear of speaking out loud. The fear of sounding foolish. The fear of being misunderstood. Not because you don't know anything, but because you know enough to care about getting it right. This week, I realized my fear wasn't about the past. It was about the future. About what might change once everything is named. Once silence breaks. Once clarity enters the room. Fear told me stories. Convincing ones. Maybe now is not the right time. Maybe this will hurt the children. Maybe staying quiet is safer. Fear loves maybe. Truth prefers now. Psychologically, fear of loss activates the brain's threat system. When that system is active, We choose avoidance over honesty. The brain thinks it's protecting us. But avoidance doesn't remove danger, it delays growth. I noticed myself rehearsing conversations that never happened. Practicing sentences in my head, then deleting them. Just like language learners do. You prepare the perfect English sentence, then swallow it. Silence feels safer than imperfection. But silence also feeds fear. One night, lying awake, I noticed how my breathing changed whenever certain thoughts appeared. That's your body signaling emotional threat. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between physical danger and emotional risk. To it, loss feels like survival. Marriage adds another layer to this fear. When children are involved, the stakes feel higher. You're no longer just protecting yourself, you're protecting a structure, a home, a future that many people depend on. That responsibility can make honesty feel dangerous. But here's the paradox. Children feel fear most when adults hide it. They sense instability even when no one speaks. Fear unspoken becomes ambient. It fills the room. This week taught me that fear doesn't disappear when ignored. It just changes shape. It becomes irritability, distance, emotional fatigue. The kind that makes love feel heavy instead of nourishing. In learning English, fear slows progress because it keeps you passive. You watch. You listen. But you don't engage. Love becomes passive under fear too. You stay present, but not vulnerable. The turning point came quietly. Not with courage. Not with confidence. But with exhaustion. I got tired of carrying the same thought in silence. And that tiredness created space for honesty. There's research showing that naming fear reduces its intensity. When you acknowledge it, the brain shifts from threat mode to processing mode. You're no longer running, you're observing. That shift doesn't solve everything, but it changes your posture toward truth. That week, I stopped asking, "What if I lose love?" and started asking, "What if love needs truth to survive?" That question felt less threatening, more constructive. It reframed fear as information, not a command. Love that has survived time, responsibility, and change doesn't disappear because of truth. It either grows, or reveals what needs work. Both outcomes are honest. Just like language learning. When you finally speak, you either communicate, or discover gaps. Gaps are not failures. They are maps. This week, fear didn't vanish. But it stopped leading. It moved to the passenger seat. And that made all the difference. Because fear warns you. But it should never decide for you. Why love feels so fragile. Have you ever held something precious and suddenly felt afraid of breaking it? Simply because you noticed how valuable it was? That's what love feels like when awareness arrives. This week, I kept asking myself why love suddenly felt fragile. Nothing dramatic had happened. No betrayal. No explosión. Just truth moving closer to the surface. And somehow, that closeness made everything feel more delicate. Here's the strange part. Love doesn't become fragile because it's weak. It feels fragile because it matters. Psychologically, when we become aware of what we could lose, The brain increases sensitivity. You notice tone more sharply. You replay words longer. You interpret silence faster. This is not overthinking. It's attachment activating its alarm system. If you're learning English, you've experienced this too. At the beginning, you don't mind mistakes. You speak freely. But once you start improving, fear increases. You know more now. And knowing more raises the stakes. Love follows the same curve. This week, I realized that fragility is often a sign of growth. When something is new, you don't protect it carefully because you don't yet understand its value. When something becomes meaningful, you handle it differently. Slower. With attention. With hesitation. That hesitation can be misread as doubt. But it's often respect. Marriage teaches this lesson quietly. Early love feels effortless because expectations are low. Over time, love carries weight. Children, routines, responsibilities, shared history. That weight doesn't weaken love. It deepens it. But depth requires care. The reason love feels fragile under truth is simple. Truth removes illusion. And illusion is light. Easy to carry. Truth is heavier, but more stable. In neuroscience, there's a concept called cognitive dissonance. It's the discomfort we feel when new information challenges existing beliefs. When truth enters a relationship, the brain needs time to reorganize its understanding. During that time, everything feels uncertain. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. But it's also temporary. Many people confuse fragility with failure. They think if this feels hard, something must be wrong. But hard moments often mean something important is adjusting. Language learners quit at this stage all the time. Not because they can't learn, but because learning starts to feel serious. The playful stage ends. Real progress begins. And progress requires tolerance for discomfort. This week taught me that love doesn't ask for certainty. It asks for presence. The willingness to stay while understanding catches up. I noticed how my body reacted whenever I tried to rush clarity. Tension increased. Breathing shortened. My nervous system wanted answers immediately. But emotional systems don't work on demand. They work through safety. Safety doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing you can face things together. Fragility is not a signal to retreat. It's a signal to slow down. When I stopped pushing for resolution and focused on listening, really listening, the sense of fragility softened. Not because answers appeared, but because connection did. This is why silence earlier felt so loud. Silence without connection increases fragility. Silence with presence reduces it. There's a difference between absence and space. In English practice, pauses can be terrifying. But pauses are where comprehension settles. They give meaning time to land. Love needs pauses too. Not avoidance, space. This week reframed fragility for me. Fragility wasn't warning me to leave. It was asking me to be careful. Attentive. Honest without being forceful. That's a skill. Not a weakness. Love that feels fragile is often love that is transitioning. From assumption to understanding, from comfort to consciousness. And transitions always feel unstable before they become solid. The question isn't why love feels fragile. The question is whether you treat fragility as a threat, or as an invitation to care more deeply. This week, I chose the second. 1. Honest conversation. Honest conversations rarely begin with courage. They begin with discomfort. This week, the conversation I had been avoiding finally happened. Not because I felt ready, but because avoiding it became heavier than facing it. It didn't start with a speech. It didn't start with accusations. It started with something simple and human. I feel confused, and I don't want to pretend anymore. That sentence mattered. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. If you're learning English, you know how hard it is to say something when you don't have the right words yet. You worry about grammar, tone, meaning. So you stay silent. In relationships, silence works the same way. You wait for the right moment. But the right moment often arrives disguised as exhaustion. This conversation happened quietly. No raised voices. No dramatic reactions. Just two people finally sitting in the same emotional space. The room didn't change, but the atmosphere did. Tension softened. Breathing slowed. Something real entered the space. There's a reason for this. Psychologists explain that emotional honesty activates the brain's safety circuits. When people speak truth without attack, the nervous system relaxes. You're no longer guessing. You're no longer scanning for danger. You're present. I noticed how my body felt after the first honest sentence. Lighter. Not relieved, but aligned. That alignment matters. It's the feeling of your inner experience matching your outer expression. And alignment reduces fear. The conversation didn't solve everything. It wasn't a conclusion. It was an opening. And openings are powerful. One thing surprised me. Honesty didn't make love weaker. It made it clearer. Clearer doesn't mean easier, but it means workable. In language learning, clarity is everything. When you finally understand why a sentence works, the language stops feeling random. Love works the same way. When emotions are named, confusion loses its power. This week taught me that honesty doesn't require full understanding. It requires willingness. You don't need perfect explanations. You need real ones. We spoke slowly, carefully. Sometimes we paused. Those pauses weren't empty. They were processing time. Emotional listening. The kind that doesn't interrupt. That's something many of us never learned. We listen to respond, not to understand. But understanding changes everything. I realized how often I had mistaken peace for avoidance. The house was quiet, but so were my questions. That quiet felt safe, until it didn't. Honesty didn't disrupt peace. It replaced a fragile peace with a stable one. There's research showing that couples who communicate imperfectly but honestly build stronger emotional resilience than couples who avoid conflict altogether. Conflict isn't the enemy. Disconnection is. This applies to English too. Speaking imperfectly builds fluency faster than staying silent waiting for perfection. This one conversation didn't end the journey. It redirected it. It turned fear into information, silence into signal, fragility into care. The most important moment wasn't what was said. It was the decision to speak at all. Because once truth enters the room, love has something solid to work with. And sometimes, one honest conversation is not the solution. It's the beginning of one. Learning English from real life. Most people think learning English happens in books, or apps, or classrooms. This week taught me something different. English lives in moments. Real ones. Messy ones. Emotional ones. The kind you don't plan for. But remember, after the honest conversation, something shifted inside me. Not resolution. Not certainty. But openness. And openness is where learning begins. Language learning and emotional learning follow the same rule. When you stop protecting yourself, information sticks. During this week in the US, I didn't study English in the traditional sense. I didn't sit down with lessons or grammar charts. I lived in it. I listened to simple conversations. Short sentences. Repeated phrases. The same way emotions repeated themselves in my marriage. Quietly, clearly, insistently. I noticed how my brain learned best when I wasn't forcing it. When I wasn't chasing fluency. When I was simply paying attention. One afternoon, while doing something ordinary, I caught myself repeating a sentence slowly in my head. Not to memorize it, but to feel it. I don't have all the answers yet. Simple English. Honest meaning. That sentence fit both my emotional state and my language level. That's when it clicked. Language sticks when it carries emotion. Neuroscience supports this. Emotional engagement activates memory systems more strongly than repetition alone. When language is tied to real experience, the brain marks it as important. It doesn't fade easily. This is why many people fail at English despite years of study. They practice language without context. Words without weight. Sentences without meaning. This week reminded me that the best practice happens when language explains life, not when it escapes it. I started paying attention to tone. Pauses. The rhythm of speech. Just like I paid attention to emotional shifts at home. The skills overlapped. Listening became deeper. Not just hearing, but understanding. I also stopped trying to sound good. I focused on sounding true. That shift reduced pressure instantly. The same shift that helped the honest conversation happen helped my English feel lighter. Children help too. They speak simply, directly, without performance. Watching them reminded me that communication is about connection, not complexity. If you're learning English and feeling stuck, this is the part people rarely tell you. Progress often looks like comfort before confidence. When you feel comfortable using simple language, fluency grows naturally. Complexity comes later. This week, I practiced English the same way I practiced emotional honesty. Slowly. Without apology. With curiosity instead of judgment. I noticed how much energy I saved when I stopped translating everything in my head. I listened for meaning first. Structure second. The same way I listened to emotions earlier, feeling before explaining. That approach changed everything. Learning English became part of life, not a separate task. It stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like awareness. This is what I want for you. Not perfect pronunciation. Not fast speech. But real connection. With language. With meaning. With yourself. Because English is not a test you pass. It's a tool you grow into. This week showed me that life teaches best when we let it. And language follows life. Not the other way around. Can love stay real? This question sounds simple. But it carries weight. Can love stay real? Not in perfect conditions. Not when everything is easy. But when truth finally stands in the room, uninvited and undeniable. This week in the US, that question stopped being theoretical for me. It stopped living in my head and started living in my body. In how I listened. In how I responded. In how I chose my words more carefully than before. At first, I thought the question was about survival. Will love make it through this? But over time, I realized it was a different question entirely. It was about authenticity. Is love still love if it has to change? Many people believe real love should feel constant, stable, effortless. But constancy is not the same as reality. Reality shifts. Reality breathes. Reality adapts. In psychology, secure attachment isn't defined by the absence of conflict. It's defined by the ability to repair. Repair doesn't mean fixing everything. It means returning to connection after distance. That concept changed how I saw this week. Love wasn't failing. It was adjusting. If you're learning English, you've lived this cycle. At first, progress feels exciting. Then confusing. Then frustrating. You think you're going backward. But you're not. You're recalibrating. Your brain is reorganizing. That reorganization feels messy, but it's essential. Love reorganizes too. After the honest conversation, I noticed something subtle but powerful. We didn't talk more. We talked truer. Fewer words. More meaning. Less performance. More presence. That's when I realized love doesn't stay real by staying the same. It stays real by staying responsive. The truth didn't remove affection. It removed illusion. And illusion, while comforting, doesn't support growth. Love grounded in illusion feels light, but unstable. Love grounded in truth feels heavier, but safer. There were still moments of doubt. Still pauses. Still questions. Real love doesn't erase uncertainty. It teaches you how to hold it without panic. This is where many people misunderstand relationships. They think doubt means danger. But doubt is often a signal of awareness. You're noticing complexity. You're paying attention. Language learning works the same way. When you stop doubting, you stop improving. Doubt means your brain is engaged. This week taught me that love stays real when both people are willing to be learners again. Learners of each other. Learners of themselves. No one is finished. Not in language. Not in love. I also realized something important. Love isn't proven by intensity. It's proven by consistency. Not dramatic gestures, but daily choices. Listening when it's uncomfortable. Staying present when it's easier to withdraw. That kind of love doesn't feel exciting all the time. It feels grounded, steady, alive. The answer to the question surprised me. Yes, love can stay real, but only if we let it evolve. Real love isn't fragile because of truth. It's fragile because of avoidance. Truth doesn't end love. Avoidance does. And once I understood that, the question stopped feeling threatening. It became clarifying. Love didn't need certainty. It needed courage. What this week taught me. Some weeks don't pass. They stay. This one did. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. When I look back at this past week in the United States, nothing about it feels loud or cinematic. No big scenes. No clear ending. Just small moments that quietly rearranged how I see love, marriage, family, and even myself. And sometimes, those are the moments that change you the most. This week taught me that love is not a feeling you protect. It's a process you participate in. For a long time, I believed love stayed real by staying comfortable. By avoiding hard conversations. By choosing peace over truth. But comfort is not the same as safety. Comfort can hide distance. Safety comes from clarity. That lesson didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly, through silence, fear, honesty, fragility, and repair. Through watching my children. Through listening instead of preparing answers. Through allowing uncertainty to exist without rushing to erase it. And here's what surprised me most. Truth didn't break anything. It didn't take love away. It gave love a shape I could finally hold. Many people watching this video are not just here for a story. You're here because you're tired. Tired of trying to learn English and feeling like you're not moving. Tired of starting again. Tired of carrying quiet doubt. This week reminded me that growth rarely looks impressive while it's happening. It looks slow, awkward, unclear. Like learning a language one sentence at a time. Like rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. The mistake we make, in love and in learning, is expecting certainty before action. But certainty comes after movement, not before it. You don't wait to feel fluent to speak. You don't wait to feel fearless to be honest. You move gently, imperfectly, and consistently. That's the message I want to leave you with. If you're struggling with English, don't measure yourself by speed. Measure yourself by willingness. Are you still listening? Still trying? Still curious? That's progress, even when it feels invisible. If you're struggling in a relationship, don't ask whether love is still exciting. Ask whether it's still alive. Alive things change. Alive things respond. Alive things need care. This week taught me that love stays real when we stop asking it to stay easy. It stays real when we allow truth to enter without using it as a weapon. When we speak simply instead of perfectly. When we listen to understand, not to win. Just like language. Simple words.
Clear meaning. Honeste intention.
That's enough to begin. So if this story stayed with you, if it felt familiar in a quiet way, I hope you don't rush past that feeling. Sit with it. Let it teach you something small. Because small lessons, practiced daily, become big changes over time. Love doesn't ask for perfection. English doesn't either. They both ask for presence. And that is something you already have. If you've made it to this moment, it means something in this story touched you. Maybe not loudly, but honestly. Because some stories don't entertain us. They recognize us. And maybe tonight, while you replay these words, you'll realize something uncomfortable. Or something freeing. That love doesn't fail all at once. It fades quietly, when we stop listening. When we stop asking real questions. When we stop showing up as who we truly are. But here's the part we don't talk about enough. What if it's not too late? What if the hardest conversation you're avoiding is actually the one that brings you closer, not apart? Just like learning English. You don't become fluent by staying silent. You become fluent by daring to speak, even imperfectly. So before you leave this video, ask yourself one simple question. Backhand index pointing right. What truth have I been afraid to say? In love, in life, or even to myself? If this story made you pause, like the video so YouTube knows it mattered. If you're learning English through real emotions, subscribe. This channel is for you. And if one sentence stayed with you, leave it in the comments. I read every one. Because the next story may begin exactly where this one ends. And you won't want to miss it.